Welcome, everybody. We are so happy that you're here with us tonight. My name is Mary Burley. I'm the Chief Educator at the Norman Rockwell Museum, and I'm here to introduce Lewis Henry Mitchell, who is the Creative Director of Sesame Street. We're celebrating both the Norman Rockwell Museum 50th anniversary and the Sesame Street 50th anniversary all summer, and especially tonight. And in thinking about Sesame Street and Norman Rockwell Museum, I ended up comparing our mission statements side by side, and I think it's just worth sharing a couple of words. So Sesame Street mission statement, Sesame Street is the nonprofit educational organization, or Sesame Workshop is behind Sesame Street. It has one overall mission: to help kids everywhere grow stronger, smarter, and kinder. Today, Sesame Workshop is a global educational force for change with a mission to reach the world's most vulnerable children. What could be more important? And from the Rockwell Museum mission statement, we talk first about the power of visual images to shape and reflect society, which we deeply believe in, and then the museum advances social good through the civic values of learning, respect, and inclusion, and is committed to upholding the rights and dignity of all people through the universal messages of humanity and kindness portrayed by Norman Rockwell. So I think that pairing ends up being worth noting. And then I want to tell you one quick story. Today I was at a trauma-sensitive training for people working in cultural groups, and I had to leave early to be here. And so the trainer was this wonderful woman named Wahida Saif. She is a licensed mental health worker and trains people in psychological first aid. But as I said, I was coming to this and that I had to leave early, her whole face just lit up. And what she wanted me to say, she said, please pull Lewis aside and tell him thank you from the bottom of my heart as part of your conversation with him today. And so I just want to give you some and I said, please tell me, Wahida, where that is coming from for you. Because I've learned in the last weeks, everyone has a Sesame Street story. And what Wahida wanted you to know is that as a young child growing up in the US, she watched Sesame Street and loved it. And when she was 13, her family moved to Pakistan for 6 years. And she watched Sesame Street every day that she was back in Pakistan to keep English in her ears. And then as a mother, she wanted to say, and now my 3 children are growing up in the United States, and they know Happy Eid, which is the Muslim holiday, is a regular thing that is said on Sesame Street, and they don't even think of that as unusual. And so I thought the arc of that story was just remarkable, and then it made me think, from every perch that I've had, child, mother, teacher, school principal, neighbor, friend, family member, and most recently museum staff member, I just feel deep gratitude for everything that you and your team does. So I think so having said that, let me tell you a little bit about the remarkable Lewis Henry Mitchell. Lewis is the creative director of character design for Sesame Workshop, and he's given that title because he does so much for Sesame Street. He directs photos of the Sesame Street Muppets, designs DVD covers, co-sculpts the Macy's Sesame Street floats, art directing, walk around venues, you draw a lot, storyboarding. Also co-designed Kamim and created and designed Julia, who I hope you're going to tell us more about Julia tonight, so I won't spoil that. But that's a very remarkable leadership move, Julia is. And you've created her both as an illustrated book character and as an actual Muppet. So welcome, Lewis Henry Mitchell, and we're just so glad you're here.
Well, if I could even begin to find the words to express how grateful I am to be here. Mr. Rockwell is my favorite artist of all time, like so many people, but he was also one of the greatest influences. Maybe I'll share them all with you, but I have about 6 influences in my life. I consider them my mentors. And of course, he's right there among them. And Oh, I'm just almost speechless, which is not a good position to be in right now. But I mean, look, I'm looking at all the covers, and it's just extraordinary. I copied so many of these, trying to understand and learn how he did things. But the thing is, it wasn't just technical with Mr. Rockwell. It was the heart behind the work. It was the life behind the work, and I carry that to this day. The work I do at Sesame Street, you know, I do draw the characters. I even pose the Muppets for photo shoots and things like that. And I'll be talking more about that later on. But when I was about 6 years old, it all started, like, again, when I was 6, when I saw the Muppets on the Ed Sullivan Show. Remember the Ed Sullivan Show? One or two people may, yeah, okay. And so, of course, when the Beatles were on, I didn't care about those guys. But when the Muppets came on, those were my Beatles. And I'd be listening in the background. You know, my sisters would be watching, and they'd be screaming and crying, whatever. But then he would say, "And here come the Muppets, Ed Sullivan." So that was it. That was my cue. So I ran over to the television set, and I just watched everything. Again, just watching and enjoying it. And then at the end, Jim Henson would come out, and he'd shake Ed Sullivan's hand. I didn't care about that guy. I didn't know who he was. But one day, and this was the magic moment for me. Again, I'm 6 years old. Now, 6 years old back then is different from 6 years old now, a lot different. But when he did the show, and at the end, he came out and he still had Kermit on his hand. Now, Kermit wasn't a frog yet. He was more like a lizard back then, but he was still Kermit. But something happened to me that to this day, something snapped in my head that never snapped back. It's the thing, the trigger, the ignition, whatever it was. It's the one thing that led me to Sesame Street, because again, I was 6, but once that happened to me, I turned into this maniac. You know, I was doing all kind of crazy things. I hate to admit it, but I would steal my sister's socks because they were so pretty. There were these colorful socks, and they said, "Why are you buying such colorful socks?" I have to take them to make my own puppets. And I don't recommend that, and again, till this day, she doesn't know. She just thought she lost her socks, but to lose one like every other day is a little bit much. But the thing is that ignition, it turned on that creative power. So Jim Henson was what started me. And then he was so generous because he would share everything about how he made the Muppets, you know, who he worked with, how he developed a television monitor as the puppet stage rather than using a stage, all these things. But that was it. For a long time, it turned something on to me. But then I started reaching for other people to see what other artists did. And no one else was that generous until Norman Rockwell. I was 16 years old. I had seen his artwork occasionally, but there was a book called, I was in high school now, there's a book called Norman Rockwell Illustrator. Not the really big one, the smaller one by Watson Guptill. And that became my school. I was going to the High School of Art and Design, but that became my school because that little bookstore that I went every day after school because I couldn't afford to buy the book. But the bookstore guy, he would have given to me, I believe, if he could. But every day I went back, and I think one time someone actually bought it, but he had another copy, so he went and got it for me, just so I could look at it. And I remember reading one thing. I'm going to share it with you because this was, at 16 years old, focus. But it was fun. It wasn't like a chore. It was a new life that Mr. Rockwell launched into me with that one phrase. So with that, I'll start my little slide presentation for you. I'm not going to make you read anything except for that. So, because sometimes people put this tiny text in their PowerPoint presentations. So again, I'm the creative director of character design, and that can mean so many things. So, and I love my job. I used to say that I haven't worked in years, and it doesn't feel like, it never feels like work. I don't have to be working until about 9:30 anymore. I'm there between 7:30, 8 o'clock every day. And I've been there for, well, full-time since 2000, so that's 19 years, but I started in 92. So it's like 28 years, and it's been a joyride for the whole time. My most difficult day on the show was I was directing 2 photo shoots at the same time on the set. Now, when I direct photo shoots, it's not with the regular puppets that you see on TV. They're armatured puppets, so they have wires inside. Remember Gumby? Yeah. Okay, when I was a kid playing with Gumby, that was my training for what I do, you know, when I pose the puppets. So I had, I guess there were two different photo shoots. One magazine from England was doing a feature on it, and then I forgot the fashion designer. He had a lot of his new clothes that he wanted to feature them on the set. So I was posing their characters, directing the photo shoot, making sure the magazine was happy, getting the shots they need to get. And and wherever I went, even when I went to the bathroom, Louis Mitchell, we need you on set, we need you on set. But it was exciting. So I went, and I'm standing in the middle. It was a little bit of a lull. I'm standing in the middle, and I have this big goofy smile on my face. And the intern came and said, "Mr. Mitchell, everybody's pulling at you left and right. There's chaos everywhere. You're not getting a break except for this one moment. Why are you smiling like that?" I said, "Because right now I'm the most important man on Sesame Street." And it just meant the world to me. And then they started calling me again, but it was a ball. So I won't get too much into this because this is licensing art. And licensing art is wonderful, but it's meant for commercial purposes. Now, the show is funded by donations and a lot of the products that we produce. So there's so many products all over the world, so they need artwork that's pre-approved, because when they send submissions, the characters, they're cute and everything, but they're very difficult to draw. It took me 6 months to learn how to draw Big Bird, because the man, Jim Mahan, the man that was training me, he'd lick his lip, take out his tracing paper, put it over my drawing, and start correcting me. One day I came in and he said, "Okay, that's fine." I said, "You mean I don't need any more corrections?" He said, "Well, if you really want me to." I said, "No. If it's okay." I said, "But if there's anything wrong with it, I do want to know." And he would point out little things, but I had learned so much, and there's no way to get them right in the first year or so. You have to keep drawing them. Now I can draw them with my eyes closed, basically. And actually, well, maybe I'll tell you this story later, but I actually had to do it once with my eyes closed. But anyway, so this is licensing art. This is a pre-approved style called the core art. So, and we have it for all the different international co-productions. We used to say how many, but there's a new one. Like just recently, I had to design characters for the Jordan co-production. So there's a new co-production constantly happening, and they're all over the world. I think the only one that's about the same age as the domestic one is Germany, Sesamstrasse. And that one, yeah, that's the only German I speak, folks. So. But anyhow, so all the characters are done in this style, and they can mix and match. Everything here is removable. Like Elmo can be moved away from Big Bird and Zoe and Bert and Ernie. They're all separatable. It's almost like color forms. Remember color forms? It's almost like that. We borrow from everything, anything to make the job work. So that way we can create any poses that we want, and even some of the characters, their limbs move. We make Big Bird's hand wave higher. Elmo's arm lower, different things like that, just to make the work as flexible as possible, because there's just so much we have to do. After 50 years, and the whole world wants to do something, Sesame, so we have to produce that. But anyhow, we have about 3 or 4 different styles that we use that are the standards. This one, the scribble style, and then one that's called cut paper. It looks like you just cut something out of paper, but it's all digital artwork. It's all on the computer. Now, I can tell you about this. This is my first balloon, at least for Sesame. When they saw, I did a balloon called, I don't know if you ever heard of Sky Dancer, but she's a doll from back in the 90s. She was rivaling Barbie. It was so popular. And so they needed a balloon for the Macy's parade. So they said, "Lou, what do you think about trying this?" I said, "Well, I never did one, but I'd love to, because I love the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. When I was a kid, Underdog, remember Underdog, anybody? Yeah. That was my favorite balloon." So I did the sketches, and I submitted them, and had to work with the Macy's studio, because they're concerned more with flight and things like that deal with flying a balloon. But I wanted to make sure the character looked like him. When they showed me their first concept, it looked like Tweety Bird, because their head was so big and the body was so tiny. They said, "No, you're not going to get it. It's not Big Bird." So they said, well, they did another version of it, and I said, "No, it's still not right." And they said, "Well, Louis, do you sculpt? Give me those tools." I grabbed the tools and I went and I resculpted it, but they told me, see all the formations on the head? Now this is a balloon. When you blow up a balloon, it's just either oval shaped or round, maybe long, but it doesn't have all those details. They have a series of cables inside the head that are pulling it to make those shapes. So they said there's so many cables in the head that if they made it the actual size, it'd be too dense and heavy, and his head would just drop. So we went back and forth and finally came to a nice compromise between my version and their version. And I was, again, it was so exciting. I was sitting there. They gave me a special place because they were very excited about this new balloon. They gave me a special place to sit, and it was right in front of Macy's. So when the balloon, the parade starts way, I don't know, like I think 79th Street and Central Park West, and it comes all the way around. So I was waiting and waiting. All these other balloons were coming, and they were nice, but I was waiting for this, because I hadn't seen the final. When it turned the corner and I saw, wait a minute, that was a drawing on my desk, and now it's at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade where the whole world is seeing it. And I broke down crying. I just could not help myself. Because, you know, well, a teacher in college told me I'd never get the job at Sesame. He said, hey, Louis, you're aiming way too high. You're never going to get that job. Aim lower. But my mother told me, she said, well, does he work at Sesame? I said, no. So why are you listening to him? He doesn't even work there. Just let them tell you they don't want to. Well, they didn't say no. They embraced me, and I became the #1 licensing artist for 3 years, and then they asked me to come on full time. So, well, I got that story out of the way. I want to show you real quick the process of a balloon. So now, at Super Grover, this is my sketch that I submitted to them. Now, they submitted a sketch too, but it was a little too neat and heroic. He's goofy. It's Grover. So I had to bring that back to this. So that's the first sketch. And of course, I had to do a couple of different views because it's a 3-dimensional balloon. They have to know what it looks like, different angles. So, yes, so, and that's the final balloon. 2 things I'll tell you about this. Now, I'm a big comic book nerd, a big fan, and I love Superman. So when we did this, I had to do the same thing. I resculpted him, but I also had to paint what's called a paint maquette. So I wanted to do something different, so you can't really see because of the photography, maybe a little bit on his hands there. I did kind of like lines like in a comic book to make it look comic book like he's a superhero. But one thing I did, I put a little Superman curl on his head, but that was just on the little maquette. That was just for me. But when they did the final balloon, you can barely see it, but they kept the Superman curl. Thank goodness I didn't like write my name or something like that. They would have probably just, so I was very, very grateful for that. So this is the float where everybody stands and waves. Now this too I designed, and what they wanted, there were 2 camps. One said, we've got to remember where we came from. The other camp said, no, we got to think about where we're going. So they said, all right, Louis, you figure it out. So I had to take the past, which is the building, and then the present, kind of reaching for the future, you know, reaching upward. That's why everything is all, you know, bent and twisted and reaching for the future. The one thing that I couldn't believe they let me get away with, if you look at the Sesame Street logo, it's actually warped, and you don't do that. You don't do that with corporate identification. But they let me do it. I said, it's not going to make any sense if that's the only thing that's not. Oh, okay, Louis, we'll trust you. I'm so grateful that they trusted me like that. And this is already what I think in 16 or 17 years they're using the same float. I did a different one maybe for 3 years, and once I did this one, they just fell in love with it, and that was it. And the Macy's people told me they had to invent tools to do what I was asking them to do. Because I don't want any real right angles on this. Everything's got to be stretching on some level. So I said, well, can I get in on some of the income on that? Those brand new instruments and tools that you had to develop? And there's Julia. So, you know, and have you heard of Julia? Yeah. She's the character on the spectrum. So Sesame Workshop had been working for many, many years trying to come up with the right way and a right approach, because it's such a sensitive issue, and we had to really be mindful of how to approach it without, you know, leaving anyone out. So the idea was if we did an illustrated version of the character and just addressed the whole community that way, whenever someone talked about, say, a behavior, whatever behavior their child was experiencing, they can always interpret it that way, because we just mentioned behavior. We didn't show her behavior per se. So she was very successful, and here are some of my sketches. This is the very first sketch I did of her. I volunteered at a school with kids on the spectrum for a while before I got this assignment. I didn't even know that we're working on an autism initiative. But the little girl, I just fell in love with her. She was, you know, she thought I was lost. At the very last day, I was the only man that showed up that day. They were all women. They said, look, we just want you to be in the back of the line, just so that everyone feels secure. I said, sure, I'll do anything. I just hate that it's my last day because I fell in love with everyone there. So anyhow, she came out, the little girl that I worked with closely, and she stopped and she looked around, and she thought I was lost. She came and took my hand so that she could walk me around to the back to where the They had trailers where they were doing like envelope stuffing and things like that. I really was in love with her, but when she did that, it really just pushed me over the top. So it's not how she looks, but I drew Julia the way she made me feel. So it has this warmth to her. But the only thing is that for many of the children, they found that bows and jewelry were not something that children were comfortable with. So I had to take them. Now you'll see the name Isabel. She used to be Isabel, but we have an Isabel Muppet already, and she's actually a hotel bell with eyes. So we couldn't use Isabel again, so she became Julia. And so that's the version that everyone just said, this is her. I said, that's great. So, and they said, no, we're not going to make a Muppet of her. We just want to use the booklets to give people an idea of how to, pretty much how to approach the whole initiative. But then here's another, this is the book that actually, was produced. But then the creative director said, you know what, this has been such a successful initiative, we think we do want to get a puppet. I said, no, you can't use a puppet because the puppet is not going to be able to represent the whole spectrum. What about her behaviors? And they said, we're not trying to represent the spectrum, we're pointing to it. And we're just bringing attention, and Sesame Street is so popular. If we bring attention, then people will start paying more attention and start, looking at them as people and not people with a problem, whatever. So I said, all right, that I can get behind. Pointing to and bringing attention to the initiative is great. So I did these sketches. They're called model turns for the Jim Henson Company. Now, again, Jim Henson was one of my heroes, along with Norman Rockwell, but for me to be doing drawings, to tell them what to do, I just couldn't believe that I get to tell the Jim Henson Company how to build a puppet. Not how, but what I wanted. So that's what she became. Now, the thing is, one of the things that I insist, because see, again, she, like with Elmo or Grover, they're like, hi, everybody, or hello, when the show starts. But she never does that. She wouldn't talk or engage with anyone. In her particular form of autism, she doesn't engage very easily. So I said, we need something that's going to give her the warmth immediately. As soon as you see her, you're going to have to be able to accept her and feel warm toward her. So I said, I want to give her human texture hair. Now they said, well, no, she's a Muppet. She needs like either ostrich feathers or yarn. I said, no. This is different. She's going to have something to make her immediately relatable. So I mean, it took a long time to convince her, but they finally gave me what I needed. So that's my baby. Then they said, it was so popular, they wanted her whole family. So I got to do a sketch of all her families. He's not the most popular guy these days anymore, but see the dad? I based him on Jeff Bezos from Amazon. But back then, I really liked him a lot, but these days he's not the most popular person. Now see, the thing is, I gave him a little, really like a soul patch, because the children are not burdens. They just require more attention. And I wanted to get that across because sometimes, oh man, I would hate to have a kid with autism. Well, no, that's not how they feel, because they said, no, my child needs more attention. This particular child needs more attention, but they're not a burden. So he has a soul patch that he kind of trims and takes care of. So he has time for himself. That's what I was trying to say. The parents have time for themselves too. It's not a burden. Yeah, but they didn't keep the soul patch, but at least they understood I gave her a beauty mark, because the moms were beautiful. They didn't have a lot of time for themselves, but she bought herself some pearls. She does things for herself to show that the child is not a burden. So here's the color version of them, and then I got to do the Muppets. So now I didn't get to design Rosie the doggy. But she's like the most popular one because she's so adorable. And do you know Abby Cadabby, the little fairy? Well, the woman that does Abby Cadabby, Leslie Carrera Rudolph, she saw the dog and said, I'm doing the dog. I don't care what anybody says. I'm doing her. And she is magnificent. They don't do that. They have to assign. They have to auditions. Now, she threw that out the window and took the puppet and started performing. She did such a great job, they kept her. This is a dear friend of mine. His name is Carol Spinney. He was the original Big Bird and Oscar the Grouch, both together. He always said he never needed therapy because he could be grouchy and sweet. So I brought him upstairs because I did the giant chalk drawing of Big Bird they just needed me to do something on the 8th floor because they would have a big meeting, and they had just finished renovating, so they had a black wall and a white wall. And you can't go into Sesame Street and see black and white. You got to see something colorful. So they said, go up and do something. So I went up and did that, and I said, Next time Carol comes, I have to show him, and he gave me the biggest hug and even kissed me on the cheek because he loved the drawing of Big Bird so much. And that's actual size. That's 8'2". So this is the big, Cookie Monster is out. If you want to know, I'll tell you why, but I'm just telling you, he is my favorite character of all time anywhere. Not just Sesame Street, not just Muppets, but anywhere. And so the Performing Arts Library across the street from where I work, they said, you know, we want to celebrate the 40th anniversary, and we want not just like the first script and some of the Emmy Awards and films and even some of the puppets, which I got to pose. They said, we want giant murals of the characters. Would you be willing to do that? I said, give me the markers, give me the paint. So when I started, this is the biggest drawing of Cookie I ever did, and just to prove it to you, I'll show you me. And you can't tell, but I'm in heaven. Just noodling out, nerding out on every little fiber of it, and it was just, and it's a good question. It's actually permanent chalk. It's like it's a version of paint. It's kind of like lipstick. But once it dries, I don't know why it had to be this extreme, but when it dries, it can withstand 450 degrees of heat or sub-zero temperatures. And it's for indoors and outdoors, but where in the world are you going to find 450 degrees of heat? Sub-zero temperatures, yeah, but 450, well. And it lasted for only about 4 months, and then they had to take it down. They didn't want to destroy it, but it was the only way to get it down. It's okay. I have evidence. So now I'm going to run through a few, because again, these characters are my buddies, and I like to, that first drawing I showed you was the more commercial licensing version of it. But sometimes they want to see drawings of the characters looking more like the way the puppets do. So I did a bunch of these for, Mead, they're a paper company. They did a calendar. And also this company called Tatley, they did tattoos. And so when people were walking around, they were like my walking portfolios. They were walking around with my tattoos on them. So I got Elmo and Bert and Ernie. And again, Mr. Rockwell's influence. You see, I mean, the characters aren't usually thought of this way, but the detail that I put in there. Look at those pants. You can go about, and see the kind of attention that Mr. Rockwell put into his work, constantly feeding me and teaching me. To this day, I still study his work for what I'm doing. My favorite character in the whole world. I'll tell you if you want to know, but I'll just keep going right now. So this, I guess you recognize that, huh? It's pretty direct. Well, I did this drawing because this when I was first trying to get the job. I said, if I do something really clever, this might really get their attention. So when I did, of course, I love both of these men, so I combined them into one image. And when I showed them, I said, Louis, this is wonderful, but you already have the job. I said, I don't care, I have a nice piece of artwork now. So, of course, that's the original. So I showed you that because, again, it's the triple self-portrait, but it got me into doing portrait, because I copied this so many times trying to get that same whimsical, childlike look that he gave himself. Of course, he made himself look all kind of grumpy and worn in the other drawing, but this is who he really is in the sketch. So that started me wanting to do portraits. The first portrait I really started to try to do was copy that one. And of course, I could never get even close. But it did get me on a trajectory of doing portraits. So I started doing many portraits for Sesame Street. We wanted to thank people. Anyone know who that is? I did a good job then. I guess I did okay. Well, I got to actually present it to him because he came to Sesame Workshop for Black History Month. And he did a beautiful talk that, was just wonderful. And they told me ahead of time, said, Louis, Harry Belafonte agreed to come. So can you do one of your portraits for him? I said, are you kidding me? Of course. This man, he knew Martin Luther King Jr. and he knew Jim Henson. They were really good friends. So when the CEO was going to present it to him, but when he looked at me, he saw the look in my eyes, like I was like bursting at the seams. So he said, he did this to justify for me to go up and present it myself. So I got to present it to Mr. Belafonte, and he's, oh my gosh, did you do this? What's your name? Louis Mitchell. This is phenomenal. I have the perfect place for this. This is going to go up in my wife's bedroom. I guess his wife had a separate bedroom, but who cares? It was going up in his house. But it dawned on me, when I shook his hand, I was shaking the hand of Martin Luther King Jr. and Jim Henson at the same time for me.
How long did it take you to do that?
That took me about 6 hours, maybe? Yes. Well, again, I worked really hard. That statement that I read earlier on about the level of dedication that you bring to something. I mean, Mr. Rockwell said, it's almost criminal if you don't approach it with everything you have. So because I did that for so many, many years, I got very fast. And you kind of have to be fast in the commercial world, but I could bring those same sensibilities into more fine art, which I mean, it's not fine art, it's still illustration, but he loved the portrait, so I felt, to me, that's fine. Now, the other, I couldn't show it because you have to have certain rights to do that publicly, but I did a portrait for Michelle Obama because Michelle Obama loved Sesame Street. During the first term, toward the end of it, they asked, so far what's been your favorite part of being first, before they even finished asking? Sesame Street, being on Sesame Street. She loved it so much that she kept coming back, and she kept inviting us over there, so the company wanted to say thank you. And you can't give politicians any gifts of specific monetary value, so they said, Louis, do one of your portraits for her. So I said, all right, I did a portrait for her and actually got a thank you letter from her. She actually wrote me a thank you letter, which I cherish, because I love her. And him too. Mr. Barack was pretty good. So when I did, like I said, when I was playing with Gumby as a kid, that was my practice for the photo puppets. Now, these are all photo puppets except for Telly Monster and the Count and Baby Bear. Those, I had to use the actual puppets you see on TV. They had to fit them with armature wire, and I go in and I pose them. This is a group pose I had to do, and the part that takes the longest is the eye focus. Now, I get to work with the man that Jim Henson picked to be the Muppet photographer. His name is John Barrett. And so even though he's retired now, whenever I need a photo shoot, he comes out of retirement for me, and only for me. I'm so proud of that. I'm so grateful for that. So anyhow, what it is he has this thing in his eye that he can see when the puppets are looking. If the puppets aren't looking right at you, they look like dolls. But when they're looking right at you, they come alive. So even though the pose could be great, they've got to be looking right in the camera. So he has that micro laser, because to me it looks fine. He says, just a little bit more. So I'll turn it a little bit more, and bang, it's alive. So, and I don't know who that Muppet is on top there. We'll ignore that. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain there. So, now this, I have to explain what this is. Now again, when they set up a photo shoot for me, they, once the lighting is all set, they put the Muppet on the table for me. And in this particular case, her name is Laura McLean. She's one of my stylists from Henson. So, Louis, Ernie's ready for you. Not just hearing that's cool. Ernie's ready for me. But when they're put up, they're just kind of like their head down. They're just twisted, not really in anything particular. So the first thing I do, just for me, is I grab their head and I turn it up and look them right in the eye, because we're getting ready to go to work. But in this particular case, when that happened, now Ernie was one of Jim Henson's Muppets. When that happened, something happened to me. It shot me back to 1969 when I first saw the show. And I said, I remember seeing the very first episode. I didn't know what I was looking at, but it was just so fascinating that now I'm the director of photography, the creative director of character design for Jim Henson's most important work. So, oh my gosh, now there was no one near the camera. Ernie was just there, and he just looked me in the eye, and I just had to hug him. I just grabbed him and hugged him. This was not meant to be taken because there was no one near the camera, but when the photographer's assistant saw that, he leaped up and hit the camera right on time, because I wasn't going to hug him all day, it was just for. But now, I was surprised that it wasn't John himself, but I'm so grateful that Jeffrey did that. And it was an $85,000 camera that if he would have knocked it over, this was the first shot of the day. Now, it's insured, but still $85,000. And then we would have had to wait for another camera. That could have been a loss of a day, but he didn't care. He took the chance to take this picture. It's my favorite picture of me and any Muppet. It was never even meant to be taken. How am I doing on time? Am I okay? Okay, I'm all right. So now this was exciting here. Google wanted to celebrate the 40th anniversary. of the 40th anniversary of Sesame Street, and they said, look, we want to do something. Now, this is going to get like, I forgot how many they said, 6 billion, impressions or hits, right? So we know this is going to be very popular. So for every day leading up toward the 40th actual anniversary, they had a different Google Doodle, but they said, we want you guys to do the last one. So I was directing a photo shoot at the time, and they came and told me the news that Google wants to celebrate Sesame's 40th anniversary. They want you to do a photo shoot. So I'm like, gosh, that's great. So they said, now you have to come up with a concept. I said, all right. So on the way home on the train, I was, I just did all that posing of the characters. It takes a lot because they're fitted with the armature wire, and to hold the pose, the armature wire is pretty dense. So sometimes my hands hurt, but I didn't care about that. So I started doodling a Google. Say that 10 times. Doodling a Google on the train, and came up with this. Basically, so they saw it and they said, this is wonderful, but we want more Muppets. Can't you get Snuffy Nick? We want everybody in there. I said, look, if you do that, not only will you not see the logo, you won't see the Muppets either. It'll just be a big kaleidoscope, a big mosaic. You keep it simple and everybody will see it. So I sold them on the idea. So this is me building it. It took 7 hours, and I enjoyed every second. When it was over, I was kind of disappointed, but I just sat and said, all right, ta-da, And this is the final. Now, there's one thing people miss a lot. I actually got Slimy in there. Slimy is Oscar's pet worm. Now, the Big Bird, whenever I have to do a photo shoot with Big Bird and he has legs on, I have to hire a performer because there's no way to, now there's a rig for his top part. From the bottom of the feathers up, there's a rig to hold him where I can pose him. But if he has to have legs, I have to hire a performer. Now, if you've seen the revamp of the Muppet movies, the newer ones, like there's a character named Walter. I don't know if you know. Anyhow, the guy inside there is Walter. His name is Peter Lynch. Beautiful, beautiful guy. He couldn't wait to get in there because I couldn't get Carol Spinney. He's wonderful, and he would have done it for free, but his agent was not going to let him do that, and we just couldn't afford that level. So we got Peter to do it at a much cheaper price. So. And he did a great job. So again, to show, now, it's not just the content, but the composition and the excitement, the acting that Mr. Rockwell was able to get into his paintings influences me without me even realizing it. So I said, let me see. I'm going to go through some paintings to see what looks similar to what Mr. Rockwell did. So this was, the kids running, and I did that. So they're running because they're excited about the new season of Sesame Street. This is maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But even the fur texture, the way I was able to, now this is still, they're not actually running, folks, just so you know. To me they are. But even styling the hair, I do it all myself. Now they're not used to that because the previous art director of photography would tell the stylist what to do. And they would go back and forth, and it was not quite as lively. But when I got there, I said, no, I want to do it all. If I don't do it right, then I'll give it back to you. But they loved what I did. So they let me do it. So this one, I love the tension they know something is going to pop once they pull it. They know it's going to pop, but they just have to get ready for just the tension. I love it so much. So it's not exactly the same, but it's close. I have a tug of war. And the story here is that, see, the reason why Telly Monster is so upset is because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 Muppets here, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Muppets over there. He caught Abby. She wasn't cheating. She just wanted to become part of it, but it upset Telly. So, and again, Mr. Rockwell's brilliant composition. Now, this is almost not going to look like it goes together, but this is again because of even the smallest details of how he placed the saw or the rulers and things like that. This was my composition again because I'm just trying to fill the space and with details, even like a detail like a little bit of snow on the bottom of Elmo's feet. The only problem is that Elmo's the only one without a coat, so he's probably cold. But the thing is, again, with licensing, you have to be very careful because Elmo is our crown jewel. He's the star, and the more you cover him up, it's not as easy to recognize him right away. because he's little. So they said, all right, just give him a hat and gloves. So that's kind of mean, but okay. So that's what I came up with. Again, it's all about the composition, how he stacked them that way, and I stacked mine this way. Now this, again, one of the greatest paintings ever in the whole world. But again, it influenced me for when I had to, I used to do the advertising inside of TV Guide, but I did the black and white ads. I said, Roy, this is way back early in my career. I was doing like Fantasy Island and Love Boat. I was doing those ads. So I'd love to do a cover. So I got my wish to do a cover for TV Guide, but it was for the 40th anniversary of Sesame Street. So not only did I do a cover, but I got to celebrate Sesame Street. And again, you see how he positioned everybody. Do you see the connection? Now again, it's all subliminal, just devouring Mr. Rockwell's work constantly. It's just in there. So when I go to do my work, he's already coming out. He's always right there with me when I'm doing everything. So now I'm just going to run through a few. Again, he tells stories with everything he did. Even looking at that Bob Hope post cover, that tells a whole story. That look in his face, you know he just told a joke and he's waiting for the laugh. It's beautiful. So I want to tell stories too. So I'm going to run through a series of some of the images I created, telling stories. Now again, these are just characters with armature wire inside of them. So I have to be a performer. I call these still performances because they're really still, but they look like, it looks like Cookie Monster's really going to grab that cookie and eat it. And Perry Dawn pathetically is trying to stop him. She doesn't have a chance. I mean, obviously. So, yeah. All right, I'll tell you why he's my favorite character in the whole world. He loves cookies, obviously, but he would give away his last cookie to his friends. He loves his friends more than cookies. So you can be passionate about something. Excuse me. You can be passionate about something, but you can be nice about it. You don't have to be mean and step over people. You can share it. He loves cookies so much he wants his friends. He thinks his friends are going to love cookies as much as he does, because how could you not? So he'll give them away, even his last cookie. So anyhow, they wanted me to, they made him the ambassador for healthy habits. So just because, you know, it made sense, right? So now they said, now, Louis, this time you can't use any cookies because cookies are sometimes food, but we want Cookie Monster to be the Healthy Habits Initiative mascot, so you can't use a cookie this time. I said, come on. He's Cookie Monster. You know the fans are not going to stand for that. We get hate mail if they think, remember at one point they thought he was going to become Vegetable Monster. And because of this initiative, and we got hate mails. I can't believe you're taking cookies away from Cookie Monster. I'm not going to let my child ever watch the show again. So no, it was not that he's taken away. It's just cookies are sometimes food. So I said, Louis, we have to bring this point home, so you cannot use cookies. But if you look in the bag, you'll see that there's a cookie there because he's Cookie Monster. Now, he's going to eat those healthy oranges, and then he'll have the cookie for dessert. But the thing with Cookie Monster is that he'll eat the basket and the napkin. He'll eat everything. If there's a cookie inside of a safe, he'll eat the safe to get to the cookie. He won't just break it, he'll eat it, you know, nom, nom, nom. So, but once they saw it, and I was going to give them two versions, one with the cookie and one without, because, you know, digital retouching is quite expensive, it can be. But I said, no, if they're going to take that cookie out, they're going to have to pay. So I put it in there, I embedded it in there so that they couldn't take it out, but they said, Louis, you're right, we will not take it out. And I put it on a red napkin so you made sure that you would see it without missing it. It wasn't out of being stubborn. These are my friends, and the people trust us to make sure that they always remain who they are, even when they grow. I mean, Elmo has grown quite a bit since he's still 3.5 years old, you know, all these years later, but his personality has grown. But you don't change who they are because they are delivering a specific initiative, and they're educating the world based on whatever it is that we get from either the Department of Education, whatever the needs are. People trust these characters to remain who they are, and I had to do that. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. They didn't argue with me ever again, at least not about Cookie Monster. So again, just another, and again, telling a story. You know, Ernie is always, he either wakes Bert up in the middle of the night with his drums, or Bert's late for whatever meeting he has to go to. And of course, Ernie's taking his time with his bubble bath, playing his rubber ducky. Again, storytelling, which is the greatest thing I got from Mr. Rockwell as an artist, but as a person, I learned about that warmth and that generosity. Like I'm having a time of my life sharing all this with you folks, just like Mr. Rockwell shared in that book, you know, Rockwell on Rockwell. That book, I don't know, maybe you don't know that, but It came out back in the 50s, but it was reissued. And I devoured that book. I must have gone through 3 or 4 copies of it. The last one, I kept it in good condition because I tore the other ones up. Not literally, but, tracing and studying and reading it and carrying it everywhere with me. Even to bed, I wake up and the book will be half torn because I sleep like I don't know what. I'm very animated when I sleep. But I couldn't put the book away. Again, more of the action to indicate the acting that goes into doing this. This is a very sweet one. Reminds me like the soda jerk that, I don't know where it is, but yeah, there it is. See, I'm good at spotting Norman Rockwell artwork. I'm really happy about it. Anyhow, again, just the sweetness of it. Because again, they're just dolls just kind of standing there. I have to bring that life, and because of, again, it was also Jim Henson, because what he did with the Muppets was very alive. I mean, he was very specific about bringing life to the Muppets. So the combination of Jim Henson and Norman Rockwell coming together like this, it made me a powerhouse. And I don't take credit for that. I take credit for observing this wonderful artwork, who everybody does, but I got the opportunity to bring it to the work that I love and adore so much. Work. I got to do this when I say work. Elmo's mom, her name is May. And I really love this one here because he hasn't learned how to button yet. So he's watching intently to see if he can figure out how to do it for himself. This picture, it means a lot to me. Yeah, Snuffy. Now, it means a lot to me because, again, it wasn't a picture that was meant to be taken. I told the CEO of Sesame Workshop, I said, no, I have to use a magic word because Snuffy is the #2 character in the teen market. And we didn't have any photographs of him because the insurance implications and the moving him throughout the city. I mean, he'd be in a crate, but it's a big crate. So they said, no, Louis, we don't want to do that. So I told the CEO, I said, you know what? We're losing revenue. Now, you say revenue, money. We're losing revenue because we don't have any pictures. I don't know who he spoke to, but he picked up the phone and said, you give Louis whatever he wants. Get this photo shoot with Snuffy done. So the previous art director, it took them years and years, and they kept saying no. It took me 10 minutes to get a yes for the Snuffy photo shoot. So John Barrett, the photographer, he said, you know, Louis, it's because of you that we got Snuffy out here finally. So why don't you go give him a hug? So I went up to him, and how do you hug Snuffy? So now, it's his nose, but does anybody know what his nose is called? Who said that? I got to give you a hug later, man. That's outstanding, because no one ever gets it. They say trunk, but it's a snuffle. I'm so impressed. Will you take a hug later? Because I mean it. That means this is my buddy. Now, okay. This is, just like being here is a full circle experience for me, because again, Mr. Rockwell's influence on my life has been so great. So to be able to come to his museum and share like this, I'm even getting choked up now thinking about this opportunity. So that's a full circle experience. This one's full circle for me because remember that story I told you about when I was a kid watching Jim Henson and watching Kermit on the Ed Sullivan Show? That was the TV set. We were doing a video series called Silly Story Time. And I don't know if you remember, but Kermit the Frog was a reporter. And he would interview all of the fairy tale characters. So now at this point he belonged to the Disney company. And Jim Henson wanted to sell the Muppets to Disney, but he was still going to be the acting producer until he passed away. But anyhow, the fact that I said, we have to get Kermit, because it wasn't my idea. It was the art director who was going to be doing the layouts. He said, can we get Kermit? And so, like Sesame Street says, asking questions is a good way to find something out. So I asked the Disney people if we could borrow Kermit, and they said an emphatic no. They said, no, we don't want to confuse the market anymore. Kermit belongs to us now, and we have to make sure that people know that. So if you put him on your DVD cover, they're going to still think he's on Sesame Street. And I said, but our cover's coming out, and it's a small DVD, small, but it's a DVD, a cover. Your movie, because it was the Muppet movies coming out that same year, but in Thanksgiving. I said, it's going to be a big stretch. They said, no, we're not. So I tried maybe 3 or 4 letters, and finally got a letter from the lawyer saying, we are not going to release Kermit to you, please cease and desist, whatever. But it wasn't enough for me, so I wrote a letter by hand, and I poured my whole heart into it. I wrote it as a fan, not as a business person trying to make a deal. Said, you know, I went on and on about how Kermit started on Sesame Street, how much he means to me, and it's Sullivan. I told him the whole story. And you see, I got him. But, I don't normally check my email, my work email on weekends, but I took my son to a birthday dinner, and I came back home, and I just felt I gotta check and see if maybe I got Kermit. And sure enough, I got him. But you know, the day of the photo shoot, I had 2 days. I had Thursday for another shoot, and Friday was the big Kermit shoot. Thursday, he was supposed to get there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So 1 o'clock came and went. So, well, you know, it's FedEx, so maybe they were a bit late. 2 o'clock came, 3 o'clock came, no Kermit the Frog. So I said, look, we got to check. Now, the company called Puppet Heap, they're the ones that manufacture and refurbish the Muppets now for Disney. So we called them and said, look, we want to know what the tracking number is. You got to find out because Kermit's not here yet. So they called up and they tell us, well, he was delivered. So, but he's not here. So, well, he was delivered somewhere. It could have been anywhere. It could have been anywhere in the world because of one mix-up. He could be anywhere. So, but you know what? I had the faith to know. It took me all that time to get a yes from the Disney lawyers. I know he's going to show up. But Len, the art director that asked me, he said he felt so bad, he went out into, we didn't know he left. He went out into the city trying to find Kermit. What are the odds? But sure enough, a half a block away from the Carriage House where we did the photo shoots, is one of the Fox TV stations. And they have this big open bay where they get all their FedEx packages, because every day they get FedEx packages like an avalanche. So they accidentally gave Fox, but only Muppet people know this. The way they pack them up, it's in the boxes that they use. Only Muppet people would know. So he was looking at that. And the security guard was there at the bay. He said, excuse me, sir, can you check the address on that box? He said, well, it doesn't belong to us. He said, it's mine. So he showed him his ID, and he brought him back, and he held the box up like he's Hercules. He came in the studio, I found Kermit, I found Kermit. And I had faith, but I was so relieved when he finally did get, so we did the photo shoot. And right here, I just finished saying, nobody pinch me. But then I said, go ahead and pinch me. This is really happening. And you know, everybody in the studio ran up to me to pinch me. I didn't care. I got Kermit. Full circle experience, from 6 years old watching him on TV to having him in the palms of my hands. A dream comes true. That's why whenever I go in the world, India, Jamaica, wherever I go, I always try to get hold of the kids. So you guys pay attention. And you too, you're all kids too. Dreams come true, and I know a lot of times, the reason I think they don't, because people talk people out of their dreams. You just have to keep, like my mother. And my teacher tried to talk me out of my Sesame Street dream. And he said, well, don't listen to him. He doesn't work there. That was good advice. That kind of stayed with me. So whenever anybody said I can't do something, I said, you know what? Maybe they can't do it. Well, who says I can't? Let me at least try. And guess where I work? So yeah, here's the man himself, the big influence. So that phrase about you have to give up something outside of the studio to bring the right things in the studio. Well, one of the things I gave up was I gave up drawing any old kind of thing I wanted to. I wanted to get good. And even though I had already started working at Sesame Street, I said, you know what? I don't want to lose that delicate touch that I have with the pencil. So I started to, again, I put away some of the cartoons and even some of the Muppets so I could get the right things in the studio. So I started to do these kind of studies at the Museum of Natural History. And this is a smiler down. The quick story with this, I was drawing this, and it took me 8 tries before I felt confident about how it looked and how I got the proportions right and everything. It felt right. This little 8-year-old boy walks up and he's looking at the drawing. He's looking up at the bones. He looks at the drawing. He keeps looking back and forth. And I see he's impressed with my drawing. And, you know, kids are like my favorite artists. So that was impressing me. So I said, do you like my drawing? He said, you drew this? I said, yeah, I drew it. What do you think? Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Hey, Dad, come see what this man is doing. Now, the father heard it differently. He thought I was doing something. So he comes running, like, he looks like, so then when he got close enough, the kid, and I didn't know what to say. I was like a deer in headlights. So the kid says, hey, Dad, look at this man drew. He said, oh, son, don't do that to me. He said, I'm sorry, sir. I said, no, I'm grateful that you protect your son like that, but I'm glad he caught you before you got too close. So anyhow, there's a couple of drawings that I guess just to study and keep my eye and hand coordination as delicate as I can, because even the Sesame characters, they look simple, but like Elmo's head is basically an oval. Now his eyes, his head is 4 eyeballs wide, his nose is the width of 1 eyeball, and his nose is a 60-degree oval. All the math I had to learn, I thought I was done with math when I became an artist, but after a while, after doing it and practicing all the time, now I can do them, like I said, almost with my eyes closed. I might tell that story later if I have time, but I wanted to make sure that I retained my ability to keep drawing as detailed as I could. I did this one too. This took about 6 hours, and I actually counted. This is about 15 feet wide. I said, but I'm going to try something different. I'm going to take a gray piece of paper and a regular pencil and take a white pencil to pull out the highlights. Again, I wanted to stretch myself to see if I could do something different. And it came out okay. But then I said, I'm going to try something in reverse. If I took a black piece of paper and a white pencil, what could I do with that? And this was my result. And I was very, very happy. It took a long time just to get the confidence that I have to think of everything backwards. But after a while, it just became, I was going to cheat at one point and take a black pencil and go, I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I just went ahead and even the freckles, he has freckles there, but I did do one thing. I took an X-Acto blade and scratched out the freckles because I just couldn't draw around little dots like that. So I want to just share this with you. This is Mrs. Charlotte Landau. She was my 8th grade art teacher, and she was the hero of my life at that point. And we remained friends until she passed away about 6 years ago. And she was always the greatest art teacher I ever had. And she was the one that when I brought in, I said, whenever I told people I want to be a comic book artist, they said, oh, don't do that. Be like Picasso. When I was a kid, I hated Picasso. I didn't understand how someone's eye and a nose could be so close and the ear, right? So, but she, when I showed her a comic book, she said, oh, why don't you bring in a comic book and let me see what you like? I said, wow, she actually she's interested in me. This is when I first met her. So I brought in the comic book, that same artist, Neil Adams, that was, he made Batman cool back in the 70s. He was my favorite artist at the time. So she said, I want to show you something. So she pulled out a Michelangelo book, and she said, now see, the way Michelangelo draws muscles, the same way that this man draws muscles. It's called anatomy. Now, I didn't really hear what she was saying because I couldn't believe she pulled out a great master and comparing it to a comic book. She elevated comic books to me because it's still artwork. It's not, don't look at the comic book. Look at the degree of art and the discipline and the study you have to bring so that the work is that good. Now, there were other comic book artists that I liked, but I loved this guy, Neil Adams, and I said, that's the difference. He's bringing a more real version of people. It's like watching a movie the way he was so good. His comic books looked like you were watching a movie. So this is my last picture. My hero of heroes. It's my mommy. She's the one that told me, don't listen to that guy, And she lived to be 98 years old. On her 98th birthday, she had a big blast. She was younging everybody, had a good time. And then she just started to calm down and wind down. So, I miss Mom, but it was all on her terms, and she's still with me. And this, of course, the book that she bought me, $81. She found it. She was able to buy that book for me, and that was basically my Bible. So that's the end of my presentation as far as the images go, but can you give me another couple of minutes? Would that be all right? Can you guess who he is? Grover? Who said that? Security? No. Now, whenever I talk about what I do with photo shoots, it's hard for people to understand. Like, what do you mean you direct photo shoots? They're puppets, aren't they moving around? Like I told you, when I was a kid playing with Gumby, that was my training. So their armature was aluminum wire inside of him. So that's how I'm able to, to pose and everything. So again, now that is not an Elmo pose. Elmo was never humped over like this. I'm sorry. I'll fix it. Now he's gonna give you a greeting the way Elmo would. But this again, I'm not performing with my hand inside, it's all external because he was fitted with armature wire, so. A little enthusiasm, no legs. Actually, a little more enthusiasm. his fingers, I can call it individual digits. It's the people at the Gemensa Company. They are just so wonderful. Now, here's where the magic happens. Now, now, one thing though, this is a big star, so I gotta give him some grooming. So, no, look, I mean, again, if he looks too disheveled, he's only 3.5 years old, so he shouldn't be too disheveled. I mean, he's a little boy, he runs around and does crazy things, but he still should look at least decent, so.
Do his eyes move, or do you have to move his head?
You have to move his head. That's, again, another brilliant thing that Gemensa did. You know, a lot of times people think that the puppet's eyes move, but the way he designed these balls, when they turn their head, it looks like the pupil is moving, just from because it's a full circle. So it looks like the eyes are moving, but they don't. The only ones remember Fraggle Rock?
Yeah.
There's a character named Wembley. His eyes spun around in his head like he was dizzy. Yeah.
Take a picture of you and the kids with Elmo?
But yeah, we'll do that afterwards, if that's okay. So that's, I did that demo, but I do something sometimes when I go to schools. I did this in India, and it was such a thrill. Maybe 3 of you could just ask me, or give me an assignment. Give me a pose to put Elmo in. Now, I have to say this. Remember, he's not going to do something like put his finger in his nose or like that. He's Elmo, and he's representing cleanliness and joy and happiness and good habits. Anybody want to yell something? Just yell something out.
Catching a football.
Catching a football. That's cool. No one's ever asked for that.
Going out for a pass.
Wow. Lean back one more. How's that? Another one?
Gymnastics, like on the bars.
Okay. But there's no bar, so I have to
You
pretend.
pretend.
Use your imagination.
Or the wings.
No. This is a challenge. This is good. I like to be challenged. It doesn't happen that often when I have to really think about, you behave, okay. Now remember, he's 3.5 years old, so he doesn't quite know how to do this yet. So, now just pretend he's holding the bar. And see, I'm able to bend his fingers to make it look like he's actually holding, which is so awesome. He's a bit he lost his arm. It's okay. I'll show you what I have to do whenever. See, his arm just came loose. But I'll show you what I have to do when that happens, because it happens at photo shoot, so we can't stop the shoot. So this is actually a perfect thing. Thanks, Elmo. Okay. So see, he's a bit nervous. He doesn't know quite how to do it. Okay, one more. And this is good because his arm is broken, so now he has to go to the hospital. But he's okay. No pain. Just one more. Diving.
Diving.
Okay.
That's a good one.
That's a good one, because now I have to say, how am I going to do that with a broken arm? Of course, the thing about Mr. Rockwell's paintings of diving.
Like you're diving,
Actually, I want to look at you guys. So. Now, cleverly, I'll just use one of his other fingers to count. A little bit more. That'll hide it. go. You know, we have a co-production in Australia, and their character's name is Ali. And they gave me a real chance at Lewis. We wanted Ali to be snorkeling underwater. I said, so how do he had like ostrich feather hair. I said, how do we do that? So everybody said, well, let's use a big fan or a blow dryer. He said, this doesn't look right. So I said, all right, I know what to do. So I turned him completely upside down, and his feathers were dangling. I mean, I'm not upside down, but he was upside down. His feathers were dangling. We turned the camera upside down, and we flipped all the lighting. So it worked out perfectly. Watching Jim Henson and Mr. Rockwell, all the problems that they solved, they had to be very creative to solve these problems. So that wore off on me. So again, I carry these guys everywhere. So thank you, Mr. Rockwell. All right. Even though his arm is broken, we'll be able to do a nice pose with the kids.
How do you fix his arm?
Now they have to go back in there, and you really want to hear this? They have to open the semen back and then reconnect it. What happened was that I can tell, they used a hose clamp, and the hose clamp came loose. That's what it was, because when I twisted his arm, it just loosened up. But he's fine. He's very happy. Watch this. That's a good question, but again, it depends on the initiative and how involved it is. So, well, Julia, I could say Julia took like 15 years, but I didn't know that they were working on all the initiative and development, the concept, and interviewing people in the community, all the kind of stuff that went into all that stuff. Like I said before, character design is not drawing a nice-looking character. It's understanding what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, what the story is. Now the character will be extracted from that. So it could take. All right, when I did the storyboards, they needed a postman. They needed a postman, sorry. And so I drew a postman. But, you know, remember the little round blue guy that Grover would always be bothering on Sesame Street? Mr. Johnson. They call that the Fat Blue Muppet. When he has no eyes or anything, he's just called the Fat Blue Muppet. And so I used the Fat Blue Muppet, and I put, God bless you, and I gave him a big nose, little beady eyes, and a mustache, and I think I gave him a beard and the hat. So I sketched it. That took no time at all, because I gave him a funny Muppet. They needed a funny character. It wasn't tied to an initiative as much as it was a storyline. So they needed a postman. So. Yes.
I am so excited that Julia has arrived on the scene.
Yes.
It's such a sensitive subject. How do you deal with the parents and the kids? They're both in such a delicate place, and Julia could really help so many people. I wonder how it's worked out.
Oh, it's been tremendously successful. And the only way to know that is the feedback and the response from the community. Again, even though she only has her own behaviors, they've seen past that, because the kind of attention that's being paid now to autism in general has escalated since Julia has arrived. And the parents are very generous about giving us even more feedback, and the studies go on and on and on. You know, they never stop. I mean, even though she's been made and she's been on the show for a couple of years now, but the studies are going on. We never stop. We never sit on our laurels or anything like that. We continue to try to meet the communities, talk to the communities, because, like I said, the phrase is, if you've met one person with autism, you've only met one person with autism. Everyone's different. So everything we can hear, I mean, we're not going to try to give her every attribute or every behavior or whatever, but we're certainly going to continue to listen to what the community is saying. That's why she has a family now. At first it was just her. And Alan, you know Alan that runs Mr. Hooper's store now? Anybody still watch Sesame Street here? Okay. Yeah, no, I watch. But yeah, Alan now runs Mr. Hooper's store. And he was basically the caretaker for Julia. But they said, no, we want to see her whole family, so you can see how the family dynamic works. And, you know, again, we got that because of the families that came. you know, and shared so much, you know, sometimes with joy, sometimes with tears. It can be a real hardship in some situations, especially financially. So, no, she's been tremendous, and, you know, we continue to learn more and more about the initiative and about the families and their needs. Yes, sir.
I imagine after 50 years, the voices of people, the Cookie Monster's voice, the original, who was the original voice, and somebody had to change, or how did they, or did you audition people to do the voice, or how?
No, very good.
The original person that did the Cookie Monster's voice is not doing that any longer.
You could tell, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
no,
so
no.
did they have auditions, and what was that like? Did one person after another come in and do a voice? Or?
Oh, absolutely. They have to audition because not everybody can do every voice.
Is there judging on the voice?
No. That's I would love to have, but I would have picked the one they picked. His name now is David Rudman. He does Cookie Monster, but the original was Frank Oz. Frank Oz is a master. He's the original Miss Piggy. He's the original Bert. You know, he did Grover. He also did Yoda for Star Wars. So, and I was so excited because when I met Mr. Rockwell's son, Jarvis, his older son, Stephanie introduced us and said, Jarvis, this is Louis Mitchell from New York. He said, hi, nice to meet you. And he said, he works for Sesame Street. Sesame Street! He reached in his pocket and pulled out a little Yoda doll. Like Norman Rockwell's son walking around with a Yoda doll. It was so cool. So, but yeah, so they audition for everything. Right now, Grover's done by a young man named Eric Jacobson, and he is brilliant. He also does Oscar the Grouch now, and I was completely fooled when he took over because Carol Spinney retired. You know, he was the last time he did Big Bird, I believe he was 83, and he was still inside that bird. That bird is heavy, and he has to perform and work the eyes, the mouth. He could even roller skate, and I think once he was in a unicycle on the bird. But yeah, there are very few people that are like Marty Robinson. Still, well, he wasn't the original Snuffy, but he's been doing Snuffy for a very long time. He was the original Telly Monster. I don't know if you remember Telly Monster, but yeah. So yeah, they have to, and they train new people too. Like right now, the person that does Elmo, he was trained for 2 years, you know, and then it came in very handy that now he's doing the voice. And the performance. If people think it's just one person doing the voice and one person doing the performance, but it's always the same person. So, excellent question, sir. You have a question? Yes, hi.
How long was your longest, flirting or something, and how long was your shortest?
Wow, no one has ever asked me that before. That's pretty cool. The drawing that took the longest. Boy, you stumped me here, girl. I think maybe it was, I also did a painting of the Bidens, you know, the vice president and his wife. And that was the first time I had to do a color piece. So it was just to thank them for an initiative they helped us years and years and years ago. But I was so nervous because it was an actual gift that was going to be given, so I wanted it to become perfect. And it took my time. The shortest, that's easy. I had to draw Elmo. There was a book that came out a while back, and they wanted me to, because I art directed the book, and I did illustrations on the inside. So they said, we want you to go out to like Barnes & Noble and autograph the books. I said, well, I didn't really write the book, I did the illustrations, but I tell you what, I'll draw an Elmo. I got it down to about 17 seconds to draw an Elmo head. Yeah, because you know why? Because I had the first time I had to do 800 books, and then that was on a Sunday. Then that following Tuesday, Barnes & Noble called me and said, Mr. Mitchell, we have a few more books. Would you mind coming in to autograph those? I said, oh yeah, sure. Another 200 books. So from that Sunday to that Tuesday, I did 1,000 Elmos. But 17 seconds. I wish I had a pad here so I could do a quick demo, but I don't, so don't ask me. Yes?
First of all, thank you for your inspirational messages, and I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
And you mentioned drawing in the dark. Yeah, well, I don't know, blindfold.
No, not blindfold, with my eyes closed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Would you share that story?
Sure.
It piqued my interest
Okay, sure. And this is genuine, folks. Now, it wasn't a complete drawing, but what happened was that I had been working all night, and I had a deadline. Now, when you're a freelance artist, this is when I was freelancing for the Sesame Workshop. Now, at that point, I had gotten Elmo down pretty well. This is before I had to draw him for 17 seconds. But I had gotten a pretty good handle on Elmo. So I was nodding off, and I had to keep drawing, and nodding off. And at one point, I nodded off, and I hadn't quite finished the drawing. When I opened my eyes, his nose was completed. I drew his nose with my eyes closed. And it was in the right spot. And so that's my story. So I hope it was worth it. Yes, dear.
Do you ever create your own Muppet designs just for the heck of it without being on assignment?
Well, yeah, and it's interesting you say that. You know, my work at Sesame is almost a break because I have I'm developing a children's self-esteem program, and it's puppets, but it's not Muppets. That's one of the things I don't like, when people make their own puppets and they look like Muppets. You know, that's very specific. So I have my own little tiger character, but I'm using different materials. I really respect what Jim Henson did. It took a long time to develop that look, the materials that he researched. It took forever. So I said, you know what, instead of just, I mean, it's okay to borrow and to be influenced, but instead of doing that, I wanted to come up with something that was not completely unique, but different than what he had done. Somebody's sneaking up on me over here. I see them. And I'm like, hi, how are you, Val? So did I answer your question? Did I? What was the question again? Your own character. Yeah, my own character, yes. So I'm writing a jazz rock opera. I play the piano. I'm doing an animated feature film. I'm doing a graphic novel series, and then a children's self-esteem initiative, which is all puppets. So Sesame's my break, and I love it. Yes, sir.
When you're producing digital artwork, do you prefer to do pen and ink first to get your ideas together, or do you go directly?
Oh, beautiful question, because I'm kind of one of those people. I'm not a Luddite, but the computer's a beautiful tool, but it is a tool. To me, it's not meant to be the end all. So to me, it's the human experience to constantly interact with the planet. Take paper and pencil, paint, clay. The people that I know that do all their work on the computer, there's something that starts to become desensitized. And I say, even though like the original work, that first work that I showed you, all that is digital work, it started with pencil drawings. And that way I can still play and still feel, I still feel the same when I was like 5 and 6 years old when I'm drawing. But I know I have to deliver digital assets so that they can blow them up or do whatever they want to, they can mix and match. But it's got to start with a human hand. The first time I came to this museum, you know this guy's art. If you don't know his name is Drew Struzan. He does like all the Star Wars movie posters and the Back to the Future, Indiana Jones. When I first came here, they said, there's another show on back. I said, I don't care about that. I want to see Norman Rockwell. They said, well, it's Drew Struzan. I couldn't believe that Drew Struzan and Norman Rockwell at the same time, So anyhow, I became really good friends with Drew Struzan because I just called them up one day. Artists love each other. I mean, we really do. That's why Mr. Rockwell was so generous, and they would have these meetings at his home. But I asked Drew, see, I did it again. I get on these tangents, and I get so excited about what I'm trying to share with you. So he's the one that told me. He said, when you look at his work, it looks very finished, but that's just like Mr. Rockwell's work. It looks very finished on the covers. You look up close, it's very loose and free. It's beautiful stuff. Well, Drew said he wanted to make sure that even when he did very tight work, he wanted people to see the human hand there, so that it's a human experience. So I always start at my drawing table. I have 2 stations. The computer station, which is a high-end, it's called a Cintiq, where I can draw directly on the computer monitor. And the other side is my drawing table. I spend 90% of my time on this side and about 10% on this side. Because it does, once you get the hang of it, you can produce some of the computer work quickly because there's a lot of tricks and shortcuts that you can take. But if you don't start there, I'm pointing to my drawing table, you don't see it, but if you don't start there, there's something missing. And that human hand's got to always be there. And that's why I love when even young artists come up to me and they say, I don't know, I'm not that crazy about the computer. I say, I love you, and I give them a big hug. like I'm going to hug you later. I give him I haven't forgotten. And I said, you know what, don't ever lose that. You know, don't stop interacting with the planet because we live on the planet. There was a story about a little girl that was given a magazine. Some of you may have heard this. And she starts wiping the cover, and she says, broken. I think she's like, you know what? Honestly, to me, that wasn't funny because that kid is missing something, and it's going on with many generations. The more digital our life becomes, the less human it is. And so, again, people call me a dinosaur. Like, dinosaurs are cool, I don't care. But at the same time, I don't think that we should give ourselves over to just, I call it the digital wilderness. There's so much happening out there. To keep up with it, you have to forget about some of the human practices. And I think it's a big mistake. So keep drawing, keep drawing. Thank you.